All right, so these are going to be my wide receiver rankings for the 2025 NFL season. I want to preface this. I said this in my other videos if you have not watched those. But this is strictly based on this season's performance. I don't care about previous years. I don't care about who your quarterback is, right? So obviously you can make the argument that if we had a better quarterback, this receiver would have had a better year. I don't care. We're judging their statistical performances based on just with whoever they have around them, right? Whatever position they're in, we're judging them all the same. So let's get started here. Starting out with honorable mentions. I have 100 guys listed, so we have 11 honorable mentions being John Mechie, David Moore, Kendrick Bourne, Josh Reynolds, Gabe Davis, Troy Franklin, Van Jefferson, Sterling Shepard, Justin Watson, Greg Dortch, and Marquise Brown. I put Marquise Brown in there because he was injured pretty much all year, and I had him ranked pretty high coming into the year, so I kind of just wanted to put him on there because I didn't really have any fair way to rank him based on his 3 games that he played, so I just wanted to add him as an honorable mention. But next up, it's going to be Jahan Dotson at 100. I don't want this video to take an hour long, so I'm not going to talk too much about most of these guys. You guys can maybe look at the stats yourself if you're really interested, but I'm going to kind of try to keep these going pretty quickly until I at least get to the top 50 to 25 wide receivers, where I might talk about them a little bit more. But Jahan Dotson, 13 yards per game, not great. 0 touchdowns this year. He was okay. Number 99, Nelson Aguilar. So 16 yards per game, not great. 2 touchdowns though, which is decent, I guess. He was 8th in yards per reception at 16.5. That's pretty solid. Number 98, Khalif Raymond, 18 yards per game, 2 touchdowns, instead of a return touchdown as well. All that in only 12 games that he played. 97, Parker Washington, 23 yards per game, 3 touchdowns. He did have a return touchdown as well himself. He also had 2 lost fumbles, which kind of hurts him a couple of spots in my ranking. 96 is Curtis Samuel. I had to rank a lot higher coming into the year. He was pretty disappointing. There's a lot of Bills receivers who I didn't really know what to think of, so I definitely picked some of the wrong guys to be good this year. But 19 yards per game, only 1 touchdown, so not much to say about him. 95, Juju Smith-Schuster, 16 yards per game, 2 touchdowns, 0 fumbles. He was decent here for the Chiefs. 94, Tim Patrick. It's good to see that he made this list after being injured the last 2 years. At 25 yards per game, 3 touchdowns, and almost 400 yards. Pretty good. 93, Tutu Atwell, 33 yards per game. 562 yards is really good. He just had 0 touchdowns this year. Would have had 2 touchdowns, he probably would have been in the 70s. But yeah. Next is Olamide Zaccheaus. He had a couple good postseason games as well. 30 yards per game, 500 yards, 3 touchdowns. He was pretty solid. His 3 fumbles don't help his resume though. 91, Ray McLeod, 45 yards per game, almost 700 yards, with only 1 touchdown though, with 4 lost fumbles. Again, those fumbles really hurted him quite a bit. He could easily be in the 70s, maybe even above 75. Number 90, you got Noah Brown, 41 yards per game, 450 yards, 1 touchdown. So he was pretty solid. All that in only 11 games. In 17-game season, he's probably close to 700 yards, which is pretty good. Number 89, Dontavion Wicks, about 24 yards per game, 400 yards, and 5 touchdowns is really solid for him. But only 10 yards per reception isn't great, and 25 yards a game isn't great either. Number 88, Matt Collins, 22 yards per game, almost 400 yards, 5 touchdowns, kind of the same thing. He had 5 touchdowns, which is good, but yards per game, not really much to talk about. Number 87, Devon Bailey, 37 yards per game, 3 touchdowns, and only 13 games. He was pretty good, especially for a guy who had no idea who he was coming into this season. Number 86, Kevontae Turpin. He had 30 yards per game, 2 receiving touchdowns, also had 2 return touchdowns this year. He did have 3 lost fumbles, but that some of that does come with his returns that he does do. His returns definitely help him a couple spots on his list. Number 85, you got Elijah Moore, 32 yards per game, 61 receptions. That was pretty good. Only 1 touchdown though, which doesn't help a whole lot, and a pretty bad 8.8 yards per reception. Number 84, you got Darius Slayton, 36.9 yards per game. He had 2 touchdowns, almost 600 total yards, but he did have a lost fumble there as well. Number 83 got Brandon Cooks, 25 yards per game, um, 3 touchdowns, only 10 yards per reception. I had him coming in at number 31. I mean, the Cowboys, he was probably wide receiver 3 for them last year. It's kind of between him and Michael Gallup. And I thought that with Michael Gallup not being on his team anymore, Brandon Cooks is going to take a step up. But I think his age is just getting to him. He's not going to be nearly as dynamic as he has been in the past. He's still a decent wide receiver option for your team, but nothing special. 82 got Deontay Johnson. He's been on like 4 teams this season, so that's obviously not a good look. But I do have him still ranked on this list. He was decent when he did play at some stops. 32 yards per game, 3 touchdowns. In only 12 games is decent for sure. But I'm not sure if he's going to find himself on a team next year just because he's bounced around to 4 teams this year, and that's not a good look. 81 is Marquez Valdes-Scantling. So he was on the Bills, got cut, then went to the Saints and had a couple really good games for the Saints. Almost 30 yards per game, 21 yards per reception, which is second in the league, 4 touchdowns as well. Number 80, Brandon Ayuk. Very, very disappointing. Had him coming in at number 12, right? He was really good last year. I thought he was going to be around the same level this year. And pretty much every player on the 49ers was a disappointment this year. So Brandon Ayuk certainly is one of those guys. Only 53 yards per game, 0 touchdowns all year. He only played 7 games because he was injured quite a bit. Number 79, you got Cedric Tillman, 30 yards per game, 3 touchdowns in only 11 games. It's really good. I did not expect this guy to get much of any playing time this year, but he had a couple really good games for the Browns. Number 39, you got Josh Palmer, 39 yards per game, almost 600 yards, but only 1 touchdown for the Chargers this year. Certainly a solid receiver for Justin Herbert. Number 77 is Demario Douglas, 37 yards per game, 600 yards, 3 touchdowns. Bit of a lost fumble, only 9.4 yards per reception. Isn't great, but certainly a good solid option here in New England, which they desperately need because their receiving group not very good coming into the year, at least that I predicted. But Demario Douglas was a good right spot for them. 76, Tyler Lockett, very disappointing. He's just getting old, right? I probably should have predicted that, right? I still had him at number 28, which is just too high to ever have him coming into the year. JSN very much overtook him as wide receiver 2, but still solid. 600 yards and 2 touchdowns this year. 75 is Jalen Naylor at 24 yards per game, 400 yards, 6 receiving touchdowns. Pretty good there. Did have 1 lost fumble, only 28 receptions this year, so not a whole lot of volume to him, but he did do really good when he did catch his balls. Number 74, Xavier Legette, 32 yards per game, almost 500 yards and 4 touchdowns. No lost fumbles this year. That's a good sign for him, but only 10.1 yards per carry or yards per reception, which isn't great either. 73, Trey Tucker, 34 yards per game, 3 touchdowns. Also had a rushing touchdown this year. That definitely helps him there a little bit. Pretty good player here for the Raiders. Number 22, you got Keon Coleman. I had him, again, one of the other Bills guys who I thought was going to be really good this year. He was good, but not. He was solid, but definitely not anywhere where I thought he was going to be. But 44 yards per game, 550 yards and 4 touchdowns. Also 4th in yards per reception there at 19.2. Number 71, De'Ami Brown. So he had a really good couple playoff games there. 21 yards per game in the regular season, not great. Only 1 touchdown and 1 fumble, but he had a really, really good playoff performances. That is kind of going to help him quite a bit in these rankings. Number 70, Rome Odunze, 44 yards per game, almost 750 yards and 3 touchdowns. He did have 2 lost fumbles, even great. But as a rookie, wide receiver, right, I had a little bit more. I expected a little bit more out of him. I had him at 58, but he still had a really solid rookie season for sure. Not really too far off of number 58. Number 69 is Kayshon Boutte. I did not really know who this guy was coming into the year, but he did pretty solid here for the Patriots. 39 yards per game, almost 600 yards and 3 touchdowns. 68, Christian Watson. So I had him at 66. He's about the same spot. 43 yards per game, 620 yards and 2 touchdowns in 15 games. And he was 3rd in yards per reception there at 21.4. 67, Christian Kirk at 47 yards per game, 380 yards and 1 touchdown. I'd like to get those touchdown numbers up, but he was still pretty decent when he was playing out there. Number 66, Michael Wilson, 35 yards per game, 550 yards and 4 touchdowns. He was really solid wide receiver. I don't know if you want to call him wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3 here in Arizona, but certainly was a solid depth guy outside of Marvin Harrison Jr. 65, you got Chris Olave, 51 yards per game, 400 yards, 1 touchdown, in only 8 games that he played. Did have 1 fumble there as well, so he was injured a lot of the year, so I don't really want to fault him too much there, but he was definitely disappointing when he was on the field. Some of that you can attribute to having bad quarterback play because he played some games without Derek Carr, which, Spencer Rattler and Jake Haener aren't exactly going to get you a lot of great looks at wide receiver. But even when he was out there with Derek Carr, it wasn't necessarily Chris Olave doing Chris Olave things. He was getting outshined by guys like Rashid Shaheed. Number 64, you got Andre Yoshiba. So I had him coming into the season ranked, but I didn't think it was going to be much for them. But he actually did pretty good, almost 500 yards and 6 touchdowns for the Bengals. 63, Marvin Mims, so I had him at 59. Pretty good prediction there for me. 32 yards per game, 500 yards, 6 touchdowns. Also had a lost fumble, which isn't good, but he was pretty solid here for Denver. 62, you got Calvin Austin for the Steelers. I had him at 71. He outperformed that a little bit. 32 yards per game, 550 yards, 4 touchdowns. Also a return touchdown as well. He's a really dynamic guy, a solid wide receiver 2 option outside of George Pickens, but you would probably like to get somebody else better than Calvin Austin on this team. Number 61, you got Wendell Robinson. He was 42 yards per game. He did have 93 receptions, which is 10th in the league. But only 700 yards and 3 touchdowns with all those receptions. So yards per reception at 7.5, very low. But you got to give him some credit for catching as many balls as he did. Number 60, Jalen Waddle, very disappointing. I had him coming in at number 10. He was a great receiver last year, even with some mediocre quarterback play due to Tua's injuries. This year, he really didn't. He didn't do good without Tua on the field. 50 yards per game, still 750 yards and 2 touchdowns is solid there, but definitely nowhere near top 10 level. 59, you have DeMarcus Robinson, about 30 yards per game, 500 yards and 7 touchdowns. Also was 9th in the league in yards per reception at 16.3. Next up is Jalen Coker at 58, 45 yards per game, 478 yards and 2 touchdowns. I did not know who this guy was coming into the league, and he had a pretty solid year here for Carolina in the 11 games that he did play. Next is Amari Cooper at 57, very disappointing this year. He was pretty solid in Cleveland. He did not really do a whole lot once he got traded to Buffalo. 39 yards per game, 550 yards and 4 touchdowns is a decent season, but certainly nothing to Amari Cooper's standards. For 56 is Romeo Doubs. He outproduced where I had him on this list by quite a bit at 82. He had 46 yards per game, 600 yards and 4 touchdowns in only 13 games played. Next up is Tank Dell. He was pretty disappointing, but he was also injured, so I can't really fault him. He was injured for a few games, and they had some good receivers on this team. I can't really fault him too much. 51 yards per game, 700 total yards and 3 touchdowns is solid there. You'd like to get those touchdown numbers up a couple, but he's certainly a really, really good wide receiver 3 for the Houston team. 54 is Deebo Samuel, so, he was effectively horrible this year, right? 54 yards per game, still 800 total yards and 4 touchdowns, but 2 fumbles, and it's just not a Deebo Samuel type year. He was a lot better than Brandon Ayuk, I give him that, but they were both just very disappointing. Number 53, you got Michael Pittman, 50 yards a game, 800 yards, 3 touchdowns. Last year, I believe he had a lot more than 3 touchdowns, right? So that's kind of where I predicted him to be at number 27. If he would have had 7, 8 touchdowns, he could have easily been up there, but kind of disappointing in that aspect. Still a really solid. Also, I think he's wide receiver 3 technically on my list here for the Colts. 52 is Ricky Pearsall for San Francisco. So if you want to get technical, right, I have Ricky Pearsall and at least one other 49ers receiver ahead of Deebo and Brandon Ayuk. So take that as you will. But Ricky Pearsall, 40 yards per game, 400 yards and 3 touchdowns with no lost fumbles in 11 games played after he got shot in preseason. Pretty good rookie here. 51, DeAndre Hopkins. I had him come in at number 9. Hit over 1,000 yards last year in Tennessee. I thought Will Levis was going to take a step up this year, right? I thought DeAndre Hopkins would at least have a similar year to where he did last year. Obviously not the case, and he ended up getting traded to Kansas City, where outside of we had a 100-yard game, I believe, for them. He had a touchdown in the Super Bowl, but outside of that, he did much of nothing. 600 yards and 5 touchdowns is still a solid year. For sure, but again, very, very much a far way away from any DeAndre Hopkins level years in the past. Number 50, Nick Westbrook-Akine. 29 yards per game, not great. 500 yards, it's solid, but he was ninth in touchdowns. Or he had 9 touchdowns, which was 8th in the league. So aside from getting all those touchdowns, he was just like okay, but those touchdowns obviously going to help him quite a bit. Jalen Tolbert at 36 yards per game, 600 yards and 7 touchdowns. Really good and kind of stepped up to be the wide receiver 2 here in Dallas. Next up is Alan Lazard, 44 yards per game, 530 yards and 6 touchdowns in only 12 games played. Really good. Aaron Rodgers just loves this man. That's really the only explanation because I have him coming in at 83. He didn't do much of anything last season, but then with Aaron Rodgers this year, they just have a connection. They played with each other in Green Bay, so it kind of makes sense. But Aaron Rodgers loves this guy. He did perform pretty well with him. 47, Jalen McMillan. I had him at 79. He actually was a lot better than that this year. The wide receiver 3 here. He did get a lot of time as a wide receiver 2 or even wide receiver 1 in some cases because Evans and Godwin were injured. So those can kind of inflate his numbers as a wide receiver 3. But 39 yards per game, 460 yards, and 8 touchdowns in 13 games is really solid numbers. Next up is Khalil Shakir. So I had him at 72 at the beginning of the year. Again, with all these Bills guys, I didn't really know where to put them, and I kind of just messed that ranking up entirely when it came to this team. But 55 yards a game, 800 yards, and 4 touchdowns is really solid for him. 45 is Jaden Reed at 60 yards per game, 850 yards, 6 touchdowns. Also some solid rushing ability there with over 150 yards and a touchdown there as well. His 3 fumbles do hurt him a little bit here though. 44 is Calvin Ridley. I had him at 32. Drops a little bit there, probably because his quarterbacks just suck. But 63 yards per game, over 1,000 yards and 4 touchdowns is pretty solid for him. But yeah, moving on from that, we got Keenan Allen at 43. I had him at 20. I thought most of the Bears receivers were going to be better because I thought Caleb Williams was going to be better, but he still wasn't bad by any means. 50 yards a game, 770 yards, and 7 touchdowns in 15 games is solid. Only 10.6 yards per reception isn't great, but still had a really solid year for the Bears. 42, Quentin Johnston. I had him coming in an honorable mention because he did not have a good year last year, so I did not really expect him to have a great year this year either, but he certainly performed a lot better than I thought he was going to do. 48 yards per game, 700 yards, and 8 touchdowns in only 15 games. Really good year for him. 41 is Alec Pierce, 51 yards per game, 800 yards, 7 touchdowns. Also first in yards per reception here at 22.3. That's pretty impressive. Number 40, you got Rashad Bateman, had him at 81. He comes in at number 40, so he did a lot better than I thought he would. 45 yards per game, 750 yards, and 9 touchdowns. He's tied for 8th in the league, and 7th in yards per reception at 16.8. Number 39, you got Zay Flowers, his teammate, who had it 38 coming into the year, and he stays right around that same level. 65 yards per game, over 1,000 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Pretty solid for him. Number 38 is Xavier Worthy. Had him at 51, and he actually outperformed that a little bit, which is good to see. A lot of that, I'm not going to say a lot of it, but some of that does come from his 150 yards and 2 touchdowns in the Super Bowl, even though if you want to argue that those are just garbage time stats, he still did it, right? Looking at the stats, he had one of the best receiving Super Bowls ever, right? Just look at the stats, right? 44 yards per game, 640 yards, and 6 touchdowns with another 100 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground. So no fumbles as well for a guy who was as dynamic of a weapon for Kansas City as he was, and getting involved in the run game quite a bit. Having 0 fumbles is a really good sign for this guy. Number 37 is DK Metcalf. So most of the, he actually is not the highest rated Seahawk wide receiver here, even though you probably would still say he's the best wide receiver on that team. 66 yards a game, 600 yards, and 5 touchdowns, but he did have 2 lost fumbles. Not great there, but still a really good receiver. 36 is Darnell Mooney, 62 yards per game, almost 1,000 yards, just 8 yards shy, 5 touchdowns. He had a really solid year, better than I thought he was going to have. Had him at 54. Number 35 is Josh Downs. I had him at 62, and he actually outperformed that quite a bit to be the highest rated Colts wide receiver. But all of Josh Downs, Alec Pierce, and Michael Pittman are all pretty good. 58 yards a game, 800 yards, and 5 touchdowns in only 14 games. Really good stats. 34 is Jerry Jeudy. So whenever Jameis Winston took over, him and Jared Goff just had an insane connection. 72 yards per game, 1,200 yards, sixth in receiving yards in the league. I did not think Jerry Jeudy was going to be sixth in the league in receiving yards. He only had 4 touchdowns, so you'd like those numbers to get a little bit up, especially with as many yards as he had. But still a really good year for him. 33 is Cooper Kupp. I had him at 24. Drops a little bit from that, but he's still 60 yards a game, 700 yards, and 6 touchdowns in only 12 games is really solid. Number 32 is Stephon Diggs. I had him at 26. He was injured, and he falls a couple of spots, but had 65 yards, 65 yards a game, 500 yards, 3 touchdowns, and a rushing touchdown there as well. Number 31, you got Rashid Shaheed. I had him at 80. He outperformed that quite a bit. He was honestly a really good receiver when he was playing before he got hurt. And I feel like that kind of went under the radar because, again, that was in the first 6 weeks of the season. But 63 yards per game, 350 yards, and 3 touchdowns at 5th in yards per reception at 17.5. He was on pace to have a really good year if he did not get hurt. George Pickens, a little bit disappointing. I had him at 13. I thought Russell Wilson / Justin Fields was going to be the best quarterback that he played with in his career, which is true, right? Kind of a low bar, but it is true. So I thought he was going to have a better year than he had in years past, but it just did not happen. 64 yards a game, only 900 yards and 3 touchdowns. It's still good numbers, but certainly not anything great like I expected him to do this year. 29 is Garrett Wilson, kind of the same thing. Aaron Rodgers, easily going to be the best quarterback that he's played with. I thought he was going to have a much better year, which again, it was true that this is the best quarterback that he's played with. He just did not have an amazing year like I thought he was going to. 65 yards a game, 1,100 yards and 7 touchdowns. He did have 101 receptions, which is tied for 5th in the league there, but he also had a couple of fumbles as well. 28 is Jacoby Myers. He had a really good year for the Raiders. Once Devontae Adams got traded away, he was the main guy, so it does kind of make sense. Well, I mean, Brock Bowers was there too, but he was the main receiver at least. 70 yards per game, 1,000 yards total, and 4 touchdowns. Really good for him. 27 is Marvin Harrison Jr., an amazing rookie wide receiver season. And I had him at number 29 coming in. He finished at 27. So I actually predicted that pretty good. The one thing I did miss on is I thought there's actually, better rookie wide receivers than him this season, which is kind of crazy considering he was also really good. 52 yards a game, almost 900 yards and 8 touchdowns as a rookie. Really good numbers. 26, DJ Moore out at 14. Like I said earlier, most of the Bears receivers just underperformed a little bit because I thought Caleb Williams was going to be better than he was. But 61 yards per game is good. 9th in receptions at 98, almost 1,000 yards, 1,000 total yards, counting his rushing stats, and then 6 touchdowns is really solid for him. 25 is Tyreek Hill at number 2 last year, so very disappointing for him. He obviously was pretty bad when Tua did not play. Even when Tua was playing, he wasn't anywhere near elite status. 60 yards per game for Tyreek Hill is pretty low, right? 959 yards and 6 touchdowns is solid, but like Tyreek Hill should be having 1,500 yards a year because he's Tyreek Hill. 24 is DeJuan Jennings. Crazy. He was unranked coming into the year. Right? I thought he was going to be the wide receiver 3, really. And he's actually the wide receiver 1. Just looking at broad production, he was easily the wide receiver 1 this year. 65 yards per game, nearly 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns in only 15 games. Easily the best receiver on this team. Not sure if he's going to keep it up going forward, but if he does, that's a really good sign for San Francisco. 23 is JSN from the Seahawks, best wide receiver on their team in my opinion. When coming into the year, I had him at wide receiver 3. 70 yards per game, 100 receptions, tied for 7th in the league. 10th in yards, 1,100 yards, he's 10th in the league, and 6 touchdowns as well. Really good year for JSN. Number 22, Adam Thielen. I had him coming in at 67. He finished at 22. I mean, he had a really good year last year, right? But he had an amazing year this year as well when he was playing. 61 yards per game, 600 yards, and 5 touchdowns in only 10 games played. It's really good numbers, right? If you flex that to a 17-game season, he had pretty much 1,000 yards and 9 touchdowns. Really good numbers for Adam Thielen. 21 is Rashee Rice. He only played 4 games, so it's kind of hard to rank this. But yeah, he was balling before he got hurt. 17 yards a game, 230 yards and 2 touchdowns in his 4 games that he did play. Really, really good, for the Chiefs. Hopefully he can be back healthy next year. and be good for them again. Number 20, you got Jordan Addison, 60 yards per game, 900 yards, and almost nine touchdowns. He's tied for 8th in the league. Also, a rushing touchdown to add as well. So 10 total touchdowns for him. Pretty good numbers for Jordan Addison. Very, very good wide receiver too. Number 19 is Cortland Sutton. He had 65 yards per game, over 1,000 yards, and 8 touchdowns. He also threw a passing touchdown to Bo Nix. So 9 touchdowns total there. He had a great year here. Bo Nix, really significant upgrade over Russell Wilson from the years before. Number 18, Jameson Williams. So he was amazing. Had him coming in at 53. Certainly outperformed those expectations. 71 yards a game, over 1,000 yards, and 8 total touchdowns. 6th in yards per reception there at 17.3. Number 17 is Devontae Smith at 64 yards per game, 800 yards and 8 touchdowns in only 13 games. Easily one of the best wide receiver twos in the league. Number 16 is Drake London, 75 yards per game, tied for 7th in receptions at 100, 4th in yards at 1,200, 8th in touchdowns at 9. He had a great year. Number 15, Ryan McConkey. He had 72 yards per game, 9th in total yards at 1150, and 7th in touchdowns and 7 touchdowns. He also had nearly 200 yards and 1 touchdown in his one playoff game that he did play. Number 14 is Malik Neighbors, an amazing rookie season. Again, kind of like Ladd McConkey. There was a lot of great rookies this season. He is 8th in yards per game at 80, 3rd in receptions at 109, 7th in yards at 1204, and had 7 touchdowns to go along with it as well. Number 13, DD Lamb. He was number 3 coming in. He did underwhelm a little bit, but he still was a great wide receiver. 4th in yards at 84, 5th in receptions at 101, and 8th in yards at just under 1,200 with 6 touchdowns to go along with it. Number 12 is Puka Nacua, an amazing year for him. Having come in at number 18, he outperformed that a little bit. 2nd in yards per game with 94, over 1,000 total yards, only 3 total touchdowns. Just does kind of hurt him here a little bit. Number 11 is Devontae Adams, 76 yards per game, over 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns in only 14 games for him. He was really good when it got to the Jets. He's also good with the Raiders, of course. He was one of the few wide receiver trades that actually worked this season because he was good. He was really good when he came to the Jets as well. When you got guys like D-Hop, Mari Cooper, Deontay Johnson, stuff like that, who teams traded for, and they just ended up being pretty much a non-factor for them, or at least barely a factor, while Devontae Adams was easily still the best wide receiver for the Jets. Number 10 is Chris Godwin. He was coming at 36. He was injured a lot this year, but he was great when he played. 7th in yards per game, almost 600 total yards and 5 touchdowns in only 7 games played. He was on pace for well over 1,000 yards, almost 1,300 plus yards, and like 12 touchdowns this year. He had a great year when he was playing. Number 9 is Brian Thomas. Had him at 74 coming in. Very much outperformed those expectations by a long shot. Probably the best rookie wide receiver this year. He was amazing. 9th in yards per game at 78. 3rd in receiving yards at 3rd in receiving yards at 1282. 5th in touchdowns there at 10. He had a great rookie season, an amazing season overall. Not even considering that he was a rookie. Number 8 is going to be A.J. Brown, 83 yards per game, 6th in the league. Over 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns. Also top 10 in yards per reception. He had over 1,000 yards in only 13 games also. So he was amazing. Number 7, Terry McLaurin, 65 yards a game, over 1,000 yards, 13 touchdowns, the 2nd in the league. And he had a couple good playoff performances as well. Number 6 is Mike Evans, 72 yards a game, 1,000 yards, and 11 touchdowns. Was only 4th in the league. 4th in the league in touchdowns, even though he missed 3 games this season. Number 5 is Amon-Ra St. Brown, 75 yards per game, 2nd in receptions at 115, 5th in yards at 1263, 3rd in touchdowns at 12, and he also threw a passing touchdown this year. He was amazing for the Lions. Number 4, T. Higgins, crazy. Absolutely crazy that T. Higgins is the 4th best receiver in the league. But look at his stats. In only 12 games, right, he was top 10 in yards per game at 76 a game. 911 yards and tied for 5th in touchdowns at 10 touchdowns in only 12 games. If he played a 17-game season, this is 1,400 yards and 15 touchdowns. That is amazing stats. Number 3 is Nico Collins at 25. He came in and absolutely balled out. 5th in yards per game at 84, over 1,000 yards in only 12 games, and 7 touchdowns in 12 games. Again, Put that over to a 17-game season. He put up 1,400 yards and like 10 to 12 touchdowns as well. Number 2, Justin Jefferson. Having coming in at number 1. He got beat out by another LSU guy, but 3rd in yards per game at 92, 4th in receptions at 103, 2nd in yards at 1,500, and tied for 5th in touchdowns at 10. He was obviously amazing. And then, of course, number 1 is Jamar Chase. He won the Triple Crown, 1st in receptions, yards, touchdowns, and yards per game. Also, 13 yards per reception is pretty good as well. He was obviously the best receiver in football this year by quite a bit, statistically, right? But, Jamar Chase is a freaking dog. Some missing players here. Okay, there's a lot of guys who are injured and just not good this year, being A.T. Perry, Devin Duvernay, Tez Walker, D.J. Chark, Jalen Hyatt, Jermaine Burton, Luke McCaffrey, Malachi Corley, McCole Hardman, Traylon Burks, Velus Jones Jr., Hollywood Brown, and Mike Williams. So next up, that's going to be it for this. We have a simple view. I'll show you. I'll try to get out of the way best I can. Here's our simple view for you guys. So kind of look at that. Or take a picture of it if you want to. But that is going to be it for the video. Thank you for watching. Make sure to check back. I'm going to have some other positional rankings coming out after this. And go back and watch my other positional rankings if you have not already.